All right, it is right at noon, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. It is September 11th, so I do want to just, take a moment. I know this day is a difficult one for a lot of people, so hope you're taking care of yourselves appropriately today. And hopefully today's conversation will be a good one for all of us. So, a few housekeeping things before we get started. In terms of introductions, my name is Kayla, and I am with the Metro Council, which is the Metropolitan Council of Community Mental Health Centers. We're a collaborative membership organization representing the public mental health system of community behavioral health centers serving the greater KC area. We provide support to our member organizations and education, information, and resources to the public on accessing quality health services. We host the Mental Health KC Conference every May. Hopefully, some of you have been there. We also do these free webinars on the second and fourth Thursday of every month. Next month, hopefully you already have saved the date for our fall symposium, but we have an announcement. We have a new date. It was going to be October 16th, but we are actually moving it to October 28th. It will be from 9:30 to 12:45. And the topic is ethics, social media, and boundaries. We will be at the Mid-Continent Public Library, the Red Bridge branch in the community room. The cost is $25, and that is for 3 hours of ethics trainings. And we are planning to offer CEUs. Just a reminder, like we do for all of our webinars, the views and opinions expressed today are those of the speaker and do not necessarily represent the opinions of the Metro Council. And at the end of today's webinar, I will be putting a link and password in the chat to get your certificate of attendance for this webinar. All right, with that over and done with, I am very excited to introduce our speaker today, Cindy Lamb, presenting on Breaking the Cycle, the Root Causes of Crime and Violence. A little bit about Cindy. Cindy is a trauma-competent therapist, educator, and independent researcher specializing in the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and societal systems. As the founder of the Human Liberation and Balance Institute, she is dedicated to fostering self-awareness, resilience, and lasting healing. With over 20 years of experience in mental health, social services, and program development, Cindy presents complex ideas in an accessible way, inspiring systemic change. She holds a Master of Social Work, is a certified clinical trauma professional, and is trained in EMDR and IFS. Cindy's work empowers individuals and communities to create sustainable well-being and collective healing. Cindy, thank you so much for being here today, and I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Kayla. Good afternoon. I understand there's quite a few of you here today. I'm really excited about that, to be able to share this information. Really, the information that I'm giving you today is so important for you to understand, for us to have individual healing, collective well-being, and to advance social progress. It's well, before I dive in, I just really want to name this important truth. Crime and violence exist within very complex systems. And these systems, like our brain, ecosystems, our communities, are made of many interconnected parts where feedback loops and hidden patterns shape the outcomes. And when we see crime or harm, it's not just an individual act that can be resolved with punishment. It's the emergent result of trauma, inequality, and systemic forces interacting together. Crime and violence don't happen in a vacuum. They are deeply tied to systemic factors, trauma, and historical injustices. So today what I'm doing is I'm sharing some key insights or nuggets of information that will help us better understand these as root causes and how we can begin to break these cycles. I have spent years studying the intersections of mental health, neuroscience, and complex systems. And I've worked directly with individuals and communities that have been affected by these very harmful imbalances in these areas. And through that work, I've seen how trauma and inequality shape behavior. And I'm personally deeply committed to finding solutions that promote healing and justice. I created the Human Liberation and Balance Institute because I wanted to focus on understanding the biological and systemic conditions that shape human well-being. And my work is really grounded in education, advocacy, and designing systems that support what humans actually need to thrive and have well-being. So let me, actually, I can only see me. Let me share my screen. I haven't done that yet, have I? Kind of forgot. Let me do this. There we go. All right, now we're good. So before we go any further, I really want to just have you think for a moment. When you hear the words crime and violence, what comes up for you immediately? Don't judge yourself, don't censor yourself, just what comes up. And Kayla, if you could help, if you guys want to put in the chat kind of what's coming up for you, and Kayla can help sort of let me know what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Quick response. I'm seeing fear, fascism, childhood trauma, violence in the home,
Mm.
loss of safety,
Mm.
pain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fear's been coming up a lot. ACEs, basic needs being unmet, concern for others, feeling no way out.
Mm. All very valid and reasonable when we're talking about our safety. Thank you guys for sharing that. What I hope to do is sort of broaden our lens of how we see how these things show up today. So curiosity is actually the starting point of change. And when we approach harm with a lens of curiosity instead of judgment, what we do is we open the door to understanding its root causes: trauma, inequality, and disconnection. And it's very easy for us to say, what is wrong with this person? And that's really not a helpful question. When we look at this through curiosity, what we really should be trying to figure out is what happened to them? What systems shaped this behavior? And what would healing look like for this person? When we do lean in with the intention of understanding, that is when we are in a space to be able to make change. And that's really what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do for us here today. So it's been the broad narrative that crime and violence are personal failings. And today we're going to explore a more holistic lens of the complex systems and recognize how environment, the systems we navigate, and trauma shape our behavior. The reality is that human behavior does not exist in a vacuum. It's deeply shaped by three key forces: the environments we grow up in, the systems we navigate, and the systemic barriers that we face as we navigate those systems, and the unresolved trauma that we carry. We are going to explore systemic oppression, adverse childhood experiences, historical trauma, and epigenetics, and how they intersect to create these harmful cycles. We're moving past just understanding. This is about seeing these issues holistically so that we can begin to interrupt and transform these cycles. So, based on the first letter of your last name, of course, you can do anything you want, but just to try and have some people who are looking at each of these, please scan the QR code of one of these individuals. And I want you to just look at the first page. There's 2 pages for each one. I would like you to just look at the first page. And I'm going to move to the next screen for just a moment to show you what it looks like. It should look like this. It should say the case against at the top, and it should look like a file folder and some typing. I want you to take a look at that and give you another minute to scan the QR code. Each of these outlines a real life case. And what I would like you to do is to just take a few minutes and read that first page and ask yourself some of these questions. Based only on what you know from that first page, what are your first impressions? And if you would, once you've read it and you have thoughts about it, put the name of the person's file that you have in the chat, and then kind of what your thoughts are, what's coming up. And I'm going to go back to Eileen here. I picked her because I think most people know who she is. They made a movie about her called Monster. And so I have her up here as another example. And just give you a minute to read through the file that you have.
Starting to see some initial thoughts come up. And Cindy, there was one request to put the page back up where they could scan the QR code.
Yep, sure, you bet, you bet.
A lot of so far people who had Eric Smith or Yummy, and a lot of just shock at how young. Let's see.
Yummy is it breaks my heart. This child breaks my heart. What happened with him?
Yeah.
And it's not a one-off, unfortunately. These are not. Eileen might feel like an extreme example, but really, she's not that extreme.
Yeah.
How monsters are created in our society.
We're getting Tara says in terms of Yummy, what happened to him, not what is wrong with him, but what did he go through in his young life to be so violent? Lots of questions, what was going on at home? People who were so young, not fully formed prefrontal cortex.
And for those of you who didn't look at Yummy, the thing that makes me nauseous about Yummy's case is that at the age of 11, he had already been charged with 23 felonies. We charged a child with 23 felonies. That is sick and wrong. That is not okay. That is absurd. That is absurd. Okay, so you've had a chance to kind of look at that first page, see a little bit about this is what we get when we go to look at someone in a trial, to face their consequences for what they've done. And by no means am I sitting here saying people should not be held accountable for their actions. We absolutely have to. That is just the way it is. We all need to be held responsible for the things we do. But it's more complicated than that. It's not as simple as, right from wrong. You did wrong. Here are your consequences. We have boiled ourselves down to this overly simplistic creature that doesn't exist. We're incredibly complex individuals, and we need to consider the whole person when we're looking at how do we address things that are not okay for our society, that we are not accepting as behavior. So the next piece of this is to look at fundamental life domains. These are the categories of our lives that we navigate and move through that make us whole, the pieces of the puzzle that we move in and out of and create a well-rounded life. They each serve a purpose for filling a need as we look at the hierarchy of needs and are important. And in a complex system like this, like us as people and our life domains. When one domain is thrown off balance, like our health or income or relationships, the whole system begins to adapt in ways that often create greater, more widespread imbalance. Our well-being and thriving depend upon stability across these key life domains. These are fundamental life domains, meaning they are non-negotiable. These need to be nurtured and supported in our existence. But when these domains are disrupted, when they're chronically kept in a state of imbalance through things like poverty, systemic racism, trauma, and inequality, our brain doesn't get to wire up for our highest potential. Our brain wires up to survive. And when we are wired up and moving through our lives from a place of survival, this is where impulsivity, conflict, and crime take root. So asking what's wrong with this person is a waste of time and energy. That's the wrong question. We need to consider what domains have failed them. Where are they not getting what they need on these fundamental arenas of health and well-being? True well-being is not solely out of individual effort. It is fundamentally shaped by what surrounds us. So healthy biology, strong psychological development, social connection, and safe environments are the roots that support thriving. And when these roots are damaged by trauma, poverty, systemic racism, we see disconnection, stress, and behaviors that can turn into violence and crime. So when I'm talking about breaking the cycle, we're really talking about restoring balance to the fundamental roots of our health and well-being. This is the nature of complex systems. Imbalance in one area creates breakdowns somewhere else. The whole system eventually calls out for restoration. It cannot be sustained indefinitely when you're in chronic imbalance. So let's talk a little bit about balance. Balance is a fundamental principle, biologically, socially, cosmically, and systemically. It is required for health and well-being. And when we talk about disease, dis-ease is literally a manifestation of the imbalance. Chronic imbalance leads to disease, mental, emotional, physical, and so on. When our internal systems are chronically dysregulated by trauma, or when our external systems are unjust and oppressive and hostile to us maintaining homeostasis in an internal state, we see breakdowns in behavior, relationships, and entire communities. Crime and violence are symptoms of deeper imbalance, of systems out of alignment with what we actually require for health and well-being. We're constantly in a state of juggling on a biological and physiological level because the systems and narratives and what surrounds us is hostile. It does not allow for us to stay in a state of balance and ease. That's why we're all so sick, physically, mentally, environmentally. Healing means restoring that balance on every level, from the personal to the collective to the systemic. Let's just take a little bit, let's lean in just a little bit to about our brain and how it develops. It develops in stages, from prenatal through early adulthood. At each stage, it builds the next foundation for how we think, how we feel, and how we relate to each other. Our brain developed from the bottom up. It comes online from the bottom up, which means the very bottom, brainstem, right? Primitive behaviors, primitive, just survival, those autonomic processes like breathing and heart rate, all that takes place there. We mistakenly believe that we are thinking creatures who feel. The saying, I think, therefore I am. No, actually, that's not how we evolved. Our emotional brain developed next. Then our thinking brain developed. And that is how it comes online. So when you are young and your emotional brain is developing and it's not safe, guess what? Your brain is not going to use time and energy to develop the upper areas fully until there is safety in this state. It's not going to hook up right. Trauma, especially in early childhood, changes how our brain wires itself. It makes survival the priority. And in high stress environments, the brain becomes hypervigilant and geared toward threat detection, impulsivity, and emotional reactivity. Cannot let your guard down. It's not safe. You have to be constantly aware of what's happening around you. No hesitation. This rewiring affects the parts of the brain that are responsible for emotional regulation, memory, learning, decision-making. So it's not a question of why did this person behave this way. The better question is what shaped their brain to function in this way. Trauma doesn't just influence our feelings, our emotions. It reshapes how we behave, how we connect, and how we survive. The differences are very, very obvious. A person moving through life in a more balanced state is able to have connection with others, seek that out, build upon those connections. But a person moving through life in a place of survival, their behavior, their interactions, their ability to connect is very, very different. Okay, let's talk about adverse childhood experiences. I would imagine that many of you are very familiar, but some of you may not be. So these are traumatic events that happen before we turn 18. Things like abuse, neglect, growing up in a household where there is violence, mental illness, substance abuse, or parental figures and caregivers who have been incarcerated. And the original ACEs study showed that the more of these experiences a child has, the higher their risk of serious issues throughout life, not just while they're a child. These follow them through their entire lives. They're at much higher risk for things like substance use, mental illness, chronic disease, and early death. And this is what's especially relevant to us today. People with 4 or more ACEs are significantly more likely to engage in violent behavior, be incarcerated, and attempt suicide. That is not coincidence. That is the impact of trauma. And what's happening is that repeated early trauma wires the brain for threat, not to trust, for defense, not to connect with people, And this leads to behaviors that our justice system punishes, but without addressing the underlying suffering and causal systemic factors. The brain itself is a complex system. Trauma rewires it in ways that ripple out into behavior, relationships, and communities. Trauma from ACEs directly impacts our brain development and those areas of emotional regulation and how we respond to stress. Those are the things that contribute to us having maladaptive coping strategies like aggression and criminal behavior. The most recent data, and I suspect it's much higher, but officially 40% of individuals in the criminal justice system have a history of 4 or more ACEs. People with 4 or more ACEs are 7 times more likely to become alcoholic, 12 times more likely to attempt suicide, and 20 times more likely to become incarcerated compared to those with no ACEs. What's standing out to you right now? What are you thinking? What's surfacing as I bring this up, as I talk about this impact? Does anybody have something that feels strong, that they feel strongly about, that they want to share?
Let's see. When you perceive you're being hunted, you will present with survival behaviors and reactions. Stop and frisk, race-based policing, ACEs usually does not come out on who is causing the harm, but when they feel imbalanced. We're hearing that I have a high ACEs score. I'm resilient, so much trauma. And then a comment, I'm thinking that I would love to hear a presentation on mass shooting perps based on this info.
Mm.
Let's see, incarceration and recidivism rates, not being able to rehabilitate. Someone mentioned that these stats have gone way up. The last one they saw was 11 times more likely to be incarcerated. The way I view people, I love who struggle with these traits and thinking about what they did go through. Surprised so many of us survive without resorting to violence.
Mm. Thank you guys for sharing that. You're right, not everybody who fits into this category of 4 or more ACEs ends up developing into having a criminal history or mental health, suicide attempts. But the predisposition, the added likelihood of those things is shocking. So let's sort of break this down just a little bit further, okay? As we've said, trauma affects 3 main areas of our brain. And this is very simplified, okay? There are more things that happen, but this is all we really need to sort of, this is all the further we need to break it down. The prefrontal cortex. Remember, this is the last part to come online. This is our decision-making and impulse control center. When trauma disrupts its development, it makes it harder for that person to think clearly, to pause before acting, and to manage long-term goals, to anticipate consequences, and to even consider consequences. Then we have the amygdala. This is the part of our brain that processes fear and emotional threats. And people with high ACE scores, this is hyperactive. They're more reactive, they're easily triggered, and they're always on guard. Our biology is designed for us to primarily live in our parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and digest. This is where we're generally safe. There's nothing too alarming happening, with the occasional threat or concern where we pop into that heightened state of fear. But then when the threat is gone, we're supposed to sort of set back down and live in this space of ease. Most of these people don't ever live in this place of ease. They are always in this heightened state of anxiety. The chemicals, the processes that happen when we're in that heightened state, those are meant to be temporary, not chronically moving through our bodies. And then we have the hippocampus. And this is the part of the brain that helps us learn, remember, and regulate emotions. If you've experienced chronic trauma, that can shrink that area of the brain, making it very hard to learn or feel safe. Think about how many times you might have seen or heard of or observed someone being punished for a crime, say drinking and driving, or and that can be a little touchy, but I'm choosing that specifically. You're going to get punished. You didn't learn your lesson. We're punishing you. You come back in front of this judge. I told you, stop it. You know better. You didn't learn. Now you're going to get more punishment. It's not working. It's not about not wanting to change. It's about our wiring being set up to do what it's doing and not having the skills or knowledge or information to do anything different. So when someone with a high A score acts out, gets into fights, or struggles to follow rules, it's not bad behavior. It's a brain shaped for survival and not connection. Let's take a look at this. These are the brain scans of two toddlers, okay, both age 2. The child on the left was raised in a stable, nurturing environment. The child on the right experienced chronic neglect. You can see the difference in these. Let me get my cursor here. In these two circles here, there's not much happening on this side, is there? The neglected brain is physically smaller with underdeveloped regions for attention, memory, and emotional regulation. This child will struggle more with impulse control, focus, stress management. And guess what? Those struggles do not go away when you turn 18. So this isn't a bad kid who just won't follow the rules. This is a child whose brain is doing what it thinks it needs to do to protect this child. And that's why these trauma-informed and trauma-responsive approaches are essential, not just in mental health, but in schools and justice systems and our communities. Do you really think that both of these 2-year-olds, at two, that they have the same chance to live healthy, thriving lives? I added this slide this morning because I saw this article today in Neuroscience News of reported suspected abuse and neglect. 3 of the 4 substantiated cases that come through, this is what we're finding. There are changes directly linked to conduct and behavioral problems because of neglect in their development. The child isn't choosing to be a bad kid. That child isn't choosing to be disruptive. That child isn't choosing to struggle every single day to fit in or be like the others or do what you want them to do. They're at the mercy of their nervous system. So go back to your card, go back to the QR code that you pulled up. And I want you to look at the second page and see what kinds of experiences the person that you pulled had. What are you noticing? What kinds of things have happened to them that may have contributed to their criminal record? Can you identify ACEs? Can you point to what might have contributed to how they landed where they are? And I'm going to put Eileen's up here in case anyone wants to read her second page. And just put in the comments again the name of the person's card that you have, and then what you noticed about these other pieces of their life that played major roles in how they got this criminal file. And by the way, Eileen Warnos, you know how many aces she has? 12, all of them, all of them, all of them. They named the movie that they made about her Monster. You want to know how people become monsters in our society? We create them. We create them. She was created by our culture, our society.
Couple of comments coming in about Santoya, foster placement, alcohol use during pregnancy, neglect from her mother that chose drugs over her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With Yummy, gang activity, abuse, neglect, violence, foster care, and lack of supervision.
Mm-hmm. I won't go deeply into this, but there is when we're talking about Yummy, and I love calling him Yummy because they call him that because of his sweet tooth, and that speaks to my heart. Do you know why young people join gangs? Do you know the usual driver behind that? When you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the requirement of acceptance and belonging and being a part of a family system is so strong that when they don't have that in their primary caregivers, if they don't have that connection, if they're not getting what they need, the drive to move into these spaces of horrible crime feel better because I'm accepted here. I belong here. They protect me. They are going to care for me. Yes, I have to do some really awful things to be a part of this, but I'm a part of this. Any other comments?
Let's see. A lot of people, yep, they immediately went to that belonging piece and just that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone said I wasn't able to scan a card because I had to step out for a bit, but I know with Aaron Hernandez, there was the trauma he experienced at the hands of his father, the systemic failures of getting him assistance in his earlier behaviors, and the lack of cultural acceptance of his possible homosexuality.
Yeah. Yeah. All of it true. Mhm. So just how might these same things, I mean, we've been talking about specifically those who have involvement with our legal system, but this isn't theory. This isn't about people out there. This is personal. We all carry experiences that shape how we respond to the world. So maybe take a moment and just think about, have ACEs or early experiences influenced your path or the path of someone you love or care about? Does looking at yourself or those others through this lens change anything for you? Where are we at on time?
So we have just under 20 minutes left.
Okay, I'm going to move through this. I'm going to move on. All right, so let's move on to epigenetics and historical trauma. So epigenetics is the study of how our experiences, things like trauma, affect our gene expression. So epigenetics doesn't change the sequencing of the DNA, but it changes how our genes are expressed. One way to look at it is like it shines a light on top of these things. So it can flip certain switches on and it can turn certain switches off. Things like stress control, mood, and behavior. And the key piece of this is that these changes can be passed down through generations. Complex systems also evolve over time. The echoes of trauma don't just stop with one generation, they ripple forward, shaping the nervous system of those who come after. Studies of Holocaust survivors, children of incarcerated parents, and people living in war zones all show very similar patterns. Elevated stress hormones, anxiety, depression, and increased risk of aggression in children and grandchildren. This helps explain why certain trauma-related behaviors like hypervigilance, emotional dysregulation, and impulsivity can show up even when someone hasn't directly experienced the original trauma. It also reinforces the truth that when we heal ourselves, we interrupt this pattern for future generations. Let's move into this epigenetic thing just a little bit more. So the types of trauma we're describing create these types of epigenetic changes. It flips on chronic neuroinflammation. We all know inflammation in general is okay if it's protecting for a moment or a period of time an injury, but chronic inflammation is not good for our health. It causes all kinds of other problems. It flips on a hyperactive stress response, which is overproducing cortisol. Again, we don't want that in our bodies. It is not meant to be consistently setting in our system. It shuts off neuroplasticity. It makes it harder for the ability to flex and bend with the ups and downs of life. It impacts memory formation, consolidation, and learning. It silences trust, social connection, attachment, and emotional regulation. When your brain is solely concerned about keeping you safe, it doesn't allow for connection with others because it's dangerous. Increased aggression and impulsivity, which increases vulnerability to physical and mental disease. Again, just reflecting for a moment on the way trauma echoes across generations in the person that you are looking at. There's some information in there about history and family. There's information about how they might have inherited some things that came with the body, came with who they are, that were just passed down through them, through biology. That's not personal choice. So there's the problem. Now you understand the problem. You see sort of all of these moving pieces, how they come together to create this perfect storm. That's great. Understanding is the foundation, the first step towards making change, but it isn't enough. We need to have systems that not just understand and respond to that, we have to actively prevent it. And that's the shift that we're trying to make from being trauma informed to trauma transformation. So what does that look like? How do we do this? That's schools that support emotional safety and connection instead of suspensions and zero tolerance policies. It's justice systems that use restorative practices that are focused on healing, accountability, and reintegration, not punishment. Policies that address poverty and instability, because economic precarity itself is traumatic. Community-based mental health resources that are accessible, culturally rooted, and proactive. Breaking the cycle isn't just a personal responsibility, it's a structural necessity. And it's only possible when we align our systems with what humans actually need to heal and thrive. Again, thinking about the person that you were looking at, what might healing have looked like for them? What kind of supports or interventions might have changed how things turned out for them? All the missed opportunities to intervene and change course. I want to leave enough time for us to sort of have questions, so I'm going to keep moving on. Healing is not a passive process. We need to go beyond therapy and self-care. Yes, healing ourselves is very important, but we also need to radically reclaim the things that we've been denied. Safety, dignity, belonging, and justice. When harm emerges from complex systems, the healing must also be systemic. It needs to be woven into our schools, communities, and policies. And we all have a role to play in that. When you hear people reduce crime and violence to bad choices or a personal defect, offer a different lens. Talk about trauma. Talk about the complex systems that nurtured this behavior. Support trauma responsive policies in your schools and courts and workplaces. Advocate for funding mental health and healing, not solely punishment. Building collective power. Healing does not happen in isolation. It happens in movements, in community, and solidarity. One thing that's happening now in Kansas City that isn't happening in other places is something called the Wellness Court in Jackson County. And this is a court that merged the drug court and the mental health courts together. A recognition that there's more going on with these individuals than just the crimes that they are charged with. There's a willingness to go deeper and see these as whole people who've had many experiences that have supported their journey into the space that they're in. When we understand that crime and violence are symptoms, when we treat them like symptoms and not causes, that's when we can begin to build systems rooted in healing instead of perpetuating this harm. When we commit to healing ourselves and each other, we're not just breaking that cycle, we're creating something new. These are the takeaways. These are the things, the points, the nuggets that I hope you're taking away today. I'm going to open it up for questions or comments. I'm also going to put up two things. This is, please, if you have feedback about how this impacted you or shifted your perspective, or just anything you want to say about being in this space this hour, please do provide that feedback. And then I'm also going to put up some other QR codes for additional information, journal prompts, continued talking points, if you want to make this an ongoing sort of exploration. But I'll leave the QR code up here for just a minute, and then I'll switch to that.
Cindy, thank you so much. This was such a great presentation. I know we've already had a few questions coming through the chat, so I'm going to try to grab the ones that I remember. I know Tara said that, this presentation made her think about how much time, love, support it takes to reverse ACEs effects, or can they be reversed?
Sure. So the reversing, we can't change what happened. We can't go back and take away the violence or the experience someone had. What we can do is we can help people through neuroplasticity. We can help them change their brain's architecture and build new pathways that are safe and nurturing and do promote connection and connectivity. That is a process that requires repetition over and over. That is how our brain learns. It's like, if you've ever walked on, I'm going to use the example of a college campus where there's sidewalks going everywhere to all the different buildings, but there's also a lot of green spaces where there's no grass. There's like a path where people have cut through, like dirt in the grass. That's what we're trying to do with neuroplasticity. We are trying to wear a new path, to do something different, to experience things differently, and it takes repetition over and over. That's how we move them into a different space of going through life from a place of safety and connection instead of survival.
Absolutely. Cindy, there were a couple of questions. One about if there's a way to get your slides, and then another person asked for your email address, if you would be comfortable sharing that maybe in the chat.
Absolutely.
And then I will mention that this session has been recorded, and so it will get posted on mentalhealthkc.org as well. It may take us a couple of weeks just to get it all downloaded and then uploaded onto the site. So give us a little bit of time on that, but that will be available for you. And then Cindy, I know there was a question about, can an organized and supportive neighborhood aid in this healing?
Absolutely. That is actually a beautiful, that's what we need. We are so disconnected from each other. We are not designed to move through life solitarily. We are designed to function in community, to be tribal, to be lifting up and holding up each other at different points. This massive disconnection from the hyper individualistic culture that we have been a part of for decades has kind of been a big piece of how we got where we are right now. Building that community, neighborhoods coming together and saying, we've got each other. We are going to protect each other. That is how we liberate. That is how we move ourselves out of this space of absurdity. Yes. And this is the screen. It has my email and phone, and then the QR code is the website. I'm going to go to the next slide that has the other QR codes for the different materials, the slide deck, and then a few other things. So you can use those too.
Perfect. A couple quick announcements. I know there were a couple more questions in the chat. Where the webinar will be once the recording is posted, that will be at mentalhealthkc.org. I also did put that in the chat, as well as the link where you can access your certificate of attendance for today's webinar. The password is in the chat as well. It is LAMB, LAMB 9.11. So then Cindy, someone did ask if they can email you for some of those links because they're not able to scan those QR codes.
Absolutely. And it's connect@humanlbi.org. That's how you reach me. And I do a lot of speaking. I actually am working with the wellness court here next month, and I'm going to be meeting with some judges and parole officers and other people who are working with that court to help move that needle a little bit into a new space and way of working with people in their system. So it's exciting. I thank you again so much for being here and being curious enough to spend an hour here. Yeah, reach out with any questions.
Yeah. A couple more people asking about the link for their certificate. I've pasted it in there a couple more times. You may have to scroll up just a little bit, but the link is in there along with that password. The password is just down at the bottom, LAM 9.11. Lots of thank yous rolling in, Cindy. Very appreciated conversation. I know I learned so much through this, and it seems like everyone else did too. Very lively group today. So we thank you all as well for your participation today, for your thoughtful questions.
Thank you.
Still a couple minutes if anyone else has a question. Make sure that I haven't missed any. I just pasted it in again about 10 seconds ago. So if you scroll up just a little bit, make sure that your chat is showing host and panelist, and you should be able to see it. I'll put it in again right now. I know that that chat is moving very quickly, so it gets lost very quickly. Oh, you guys were right. I've been sending it just to Cindy. So my apologies for that. Thank you to someone who mentioned if I was sending it to everyone. Thank you for that. And then I will also put in the link for where you'll be able to find Cindy's recorded webinar as well. So and on that certificate site, just make sure that you put in the password LAM, capital L, 9.11. So, and then we do these webinars every second and fourth Thursday. Keep an eye on the Mental Health KC Facebook page. We post all of our webinars there so that you can see what's coming up. And as a reminder, October 28th is that fall symposium. It's from 9:30 to 12:45 at the Mid-Continent Public Library, the Red Bridge branch. Again, it's about ethics, social media, and boundaries. We'll be giving 3 CEUs for that session. So please mark your calendar for that. The registration link is up on our Facebook page, or will be up on our Facebook page in the next week or so. All right, just put the certificate and password in there again. It is at 1 o'clock. So thank you all so much for being here. I'll keep this open just a little bit longer in case anyone still needs to grab that link. And other than that, thank you again so much for being here. And yes, once we have the registration link for the symposium, we will put that up on the mentalhealthkc.org website as well.
Mm.